العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق والنور أرش أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وسيدنا وسندنا وشفيعنا ومولانا أبو القاسم محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين. أما بعد، قال الله في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ويقول الذين كفروا لست مرسلا قل كفى بالله شهيدا بيني وبينكم ومن عنده علم الكتاب صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. Respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam, I would like to once again greet you with the warmest of Islamic greetings, and that is none other than Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for without His mercy and kindness, this opportunity would not be provided to us once again, where we, as His servants, sit in front of our digital devices in the midst of a pandemic, and we engage in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Over the past few nights, what we have gone ahead and discussed is that the mainstream version of Islam that we are often taught and have succumbed to due to many years of, we'll say, influences, pressures, norms that have come about throughout the years of since the advent of Islam, since the time of the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, has led us to live a life that is devoid of understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, and also a life that has circumambulated itself in the version of Islam that is only based simply on actions rather than the belief behind the actions. And as a result, what we've discussed in the past few nights is that it's no wonder that the youth becomes disenchanted with the religion. It's no wonder that when the youth decides to consciously make a decision to become more religious in an effort to become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to resolve his purpose in life, that he becomes disenchanted by the communities that we've built today. That he becomes saddened by the fact that when he wants to become closer to Allah, he sees politics, he sees gossip, he sees mischief, and all in the name of Allah. All of this happens because people are striving to be a good Muslims. And this also is evident, as we discussed last night, throughout Islamic history. In this discussion we're going to have tonight, it's going to be part 2 of the lectures. As you know, I've only been allocated about 30 minutes a night, and the last thing I want to do is ever cut into Sheikh Bagher Najad's time afterwards. So tonight, we're going to discuss part 2 of this. Where we last left off yesterday was the time of the Holy Prophet's death to the time of Imam al-Hussein. And just to summarize, we discussed the sociology of the Arabs, because it's one thing to sit here and say, oh, geez, what happened back then? I would have never done such a thing. But it's another thing to sit there and really understand and see how certain social norms have transformed over time. We discussed that Arabs were very tribalistic in their tendencies. And when they came to the time of accepting Imam Ali alayhi salam as their leader, many of them objected. In fact, the first objector was on the day of Ghadir, which was the announcement of Imam Ali's authority by the Holy Prophet of Islam, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Ma'idah, where he says, Ya ayyuha rasul, balligh ma unzala ilayka min rabbih. O Prophet of Allah, go and make the announcement of that which we have revealed to you. And therefore, when the Holy Prophet made that announcement on that auspicious day, on that auspicious occasion, you find a man by the name of Haritha was the first of the Arabs to object. And listen carefully to what he says, and this is going to set the tone for the rest of the lecture tonight. He says, "O Prophet of God, you asked us to pray, and we listened. You asked us to reject the idols we were brought up to believe in, and we listened. You asked us to fast for 30 days and 30 nights, and we listened. O Prophet of God, you asked us to do the pilgrimage of Hajj, and we obeyed you. However, on this day, you are asking us something that we cannot do. Are you truly asking us to bid our allegiance to Ali, son of Abu Talib, on this day? Is this what you want?" Listen to what he says. "Is this what you want, Prophet of God, because he's your cousin? Or is this what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for you?" And the Prophet responds by saying that which I instruct is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted. The Prophet of God is a messenger. Therefore, that which he instructs his only purpose is to send the message of that which Allah wanted us to hear. And therefore, the day of Ghadir was divine prescription from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now listen to what Haritha responds to the Holy Prophet of Islam. He says, "O Rasulullah, on this day, if it is that which your God wishes for me to have Ali as my leader, then I cannot live in a world where Ali is my authority. Therefore, may God strike me down with a stone where I stand, for I do not wish to live if what you say is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala." The verse was revealed in the Quran. And Allah rained a punishment upon the asker of the punishment. This verse was revealed specifically on the day of Ghadir, where someone who had so much enmity in their heart towards Imam Ali alayhi salam said that for me to live in a world, in a dunya where Ali, the killer of my relatives, Ali, the one that I am jealous of, Ali, the one that has been raised by the Holy Prophet, is my authority, then Haritha does not want to live in this world, for this is hell on earth for me. And that shows the rhetoric, this shows the ideology of the time, brothers and sisters. That whenever it came to the authority of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Allah asked a very, very interesting question to the Arabs that had undergone reform for over 20 years by the hand of the Holy Prophet of Islam sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that if you Arabs have truly reformed your hearts, then surely you would accept the authority of Imam Ali alayhi salam simply because I asked you, not because you wanted to. And what this led, brothers and sisters, in Islamic history, we discussed last night. First of all, it led to a voting system that made no sense, where Abu Bakr was elected by a group of righteous Muslims. And then when Abu Bakr was about to pass away, he cherry-picked his friend Umar ibn al-Khattab. And when Umar ibn al-Khattab was about to pass away, he tells 6 people to get into a room, one of which were Imam Ali alayhi salam. And he says, make a decision under these circumstances that I tell you. And then whenever Uthman comes, who was elected from the 6, the Muslims become so angry at Uthman, they become so fed up with his tendencies that they go to his palace. Yes, he was living at a palace at the time. And they raid it and they kill him. And then we have 1400 years later, people that swear by this system that was created out of a vacuum of stupidity, out of a vacuum of pride of the Arabs, that they did not want Imam Ali's authority because he killed from our tribe, that we are jealous of him, that we don't like him. We don't like that he smiles too much. The second Khalifa said, I don't like Ali because he makes too many jokes. He smiles too much. Imagine what kind of childhood you must have had to have an issue with a man who smiles too much. And therefore, whenever this system was created, 1400 years later, Muslims sit there and they are proud of this system. They call this system the Khulafa al-Rashidun, the rightfully guided caliphs of Allah, elected by a series of chaotic matters. And then we said last night that this series of chaotic matters that would happen from Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, to the choosing of Ali by the greater population at large, and then Muawiyah's uprise, and then Yazid, was simply because people did not want to listen to the authority of Imam Ali. And the outcome of that was a religion that was prescribed simply to do actions, remove the belief, tell people to do Salat al-Taraweeh for 30 nights. Just stand there, don't say a word, let the Imam recite the whole Quran for 30 nights. Don't reflect, don't think about God. Just stand there, yawn, don't move. And then the second caliph would say, this is the best innovation of Islam I have ever done. Yes, he proclaims it himself. I have innovated something in Islam without any kind of revelation, which, in an academic sense, it's heresy. And then these actions would continue to go on, and people would be so fixated by what the caliph is saying that Yazid would come. And then the whole event of Karbala would happen on Ashura. And we discussed last night that it was not until the martyrdom of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam that the Muslims had a awakening moment where they said, oh my goodness, we can't take the word of the caliphs as the word of God. And that took, how long did that take from the time of the Prophet till Imam al-Hussein? Almost a century's time it took for scholarship to arise in the time of Imam al-Sadiq and the time of Imam al-Baqir alayhi salam, the 5th and 6th Imams, where they said, you know what, we actually need scholarship. And once again, what we find in Islamic history, brothers and sisters, is that these scholars came to master the art of ruling, master the art of actions. So they tell you how to pray, how to do wudu. If you're going hunting in this season, make sure you do this. If you're going on a pilgrimage this season, try and do that. And again, what we found in the time of Abu Hanifa, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, Ahmad ibn Hanbal, etc., was that there was another focus on actions. Now, believe it or not, this would only happen when the imam is removed out of the occasion. Because if you sit there and you just simply open up the series of sermons Imam Ali did in a book called Nahj al-Balagha, you find that it's nothing but dissecting and interpreting belief of Islam. It's nothing but understanding the theological aspects of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of death, of living life. And yet this was dismissed for centuries by the Islamic authorities. And now what we find from the time of Muawiyah was about 60 years of rulership, 60 years of rulership from the offsprings of Muawiyah, and Muawiyah being from the children of Umayyah. He was from the lineage of Umayyah. So then what we find when anybody goes and opens textbooks about Islamic histories, you'll hear this term called the Umayyad dynasty. This is kind of like a sultanate of the offsprings of Muawiyah that would carry on for 60 years. And then there was an uprising during this time by the name of the Abbasid dynasty. And this Abbasid dynasty came with the rhetoric that the true authority of God's religion belongs to the Ahlul Bayt. So evidently enough, over 100 years after the Prophet's death, we found that the rhetoric existed, that there was supposed to be an authority within the Prophet's family, and it should not have been taken into chaotic election systems that didn't make any sense. And therefore, there was an uprising, and you would think, oh, this is the chance that Imam Sadiq and the Ahlul Bayt were waiting for. No, it would be the Abbasids. And Abbasid refers to the Prophet's uncle named Abbas, who obviously his lineage would carry on instead of Umayyah's lineage. So we had the Umayyah. So let's go back in case I'm losing people. So we had the 4 caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, Uthman, and Ali, Imam Ali alayhi salam. And then suddenly Muawiyah makes an uprising and he becomes Khalifa. Then his son takes over because his father said so. And the offsprings will continue for 60 years. And at some point, another group of Muslims said, you're not doing it right. we're going to do it wrong, right, the right way. You're doing it wrong. We're the real Ahlul Bayt. We're the Prophet's cousins. We're going to take over. And then there was bloodshed. And obviously they kicked them off their throne. And then the Abbasids would come. So now we're in this Abbasid system. And the Abbasid system had a special enmity. They really hated the Ahlul Bayt pertaining to the offsprings of Imam Ali alayhi salam and Fatima Zahra salamullahu alayha. So they did their best to try and suppress the knowledge of Ahlul Bayt. And during this time, a new group of people came about with the courage to try and interpret Islamic belief. And the reason why I'm going through all these factual aspects of Islam is just for people to understand how we got here. Okay, how did we get here that when it comes to the ayats of the Quran, they are hanging on our walls as decoration, and the human will pass by them and not even read the Ayatul Kursi you have hanging from your door or your wall or wherever. They just pass by it 100 times a day and not even pay attention to the holy scripture of the Quran. How did we get here that the blessed word of God, and forgive me for saying this, turned into a singing competition? How did we get here to think that anybody who sings the Quran in a nice way is a righteous person? Since when did having a good voice make you higher in the eyes of God? How did we make a sport out of the recitation of the holy word of God? How did it become that anybody who prays and fasts automatically becomes a person of righteousness and that you should completely trust this person? How did it get here that we are constantly debating among Muslims about the true essence of Ahlul Bayt, about the true essence of the Holy Prophet of Islam? That we have yet to comprehend anything remotely about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because why? Because we're stuck in the semantics. We're stuck in the politics of the religion. And this politics, obviously it's not yours and my fault, but it is our responsibility to backtrack, to see how we got here, and then make reform and understand that this religion is there on an individual scale. Don't pay attention to what everyone else is doing and what everyone else is saying. And now that you have this opportunity to reform your understanding more so than what your parents taught you, you can start building on a sturdy foundation that the Ahlul Bayt wanted us to understand the religion. So let's go back. 4 caliphs came in a chaotic election system. This bred the son of Abu Sufyan, Muawiyah, which would have never had the courage to uprise had people just accepted the Prophet's wishes, as Sheikh Baghir Najat said. Muawiyah comes, Yazid comes after him. Their offsprings rule for about 60 years. And then Abbasids come. Now, Abbasids stay for a very long time. Abbasids stay for about 500 years. That's a very long time of a sultanate, of a dynasty, like kings and sultans going back and forth. If you wonder where these these kingdoms in the Muslim countries come from, well, they're breeds from this chaos that we called caliphate. And so during this time, there were people that were courageous enough to talk about Islamic belief and not go to the Imam of the time. And these people who were courageous enough to do that in this 500-year period were known as the Mutakallimun. And the field was called Ilmul Kalam. And this Ilmul Kalam was, in English, it would be translated into theology, where they would sit there and contemplate on reality and see how the religion would fit into reality and try and answer the question, why? Why is it like this? And so these people were, and by courageous enough, I would say, because these people were shooting darts in the dark, coming up with their own ideologies. One group of people came and said, for example, everything in the Quran is supposed to be taken literally. So when the Quran says, Yadullah fawqa aydihim, when the Quran says the hand of God is above all hands, that group of Muslims would staunchly say that God has a hand, a physical hand, hello, and that hand is above all hands. And so, first of all, that's heretical today if you think about the fact that God is having hands or any kind of human-like features, because Allah says, He is not like anything that you can comprehend in the Quran many times. And Surah Ikhlas, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدُ اللَّهُ الصَّمَدُ لَمْ يَلِدْ وَلَمْ يُولَدْ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. And none can compare to Him. Basic theology, and they missed it. So there was a group of Muslims that said, take everything literally. And then there was a group of Muslims that said, take everything almost metaphorically and say, God has a metaphoric hand and He's trying to speak in metaphors in the Quran. And by the way, many, even Shias today, for some reason, believe in this kind of Mu'tazili ideology. So God has a metaphoric hand, and He's trying to refer to Him being on top of everybody. And then you go to the school of Ahlul Bayt that had been there all along and say, Imam, what's Allah referring to when it comes to the hand of Allah? And the Imam would reply to say, the hand of Allah was in reference to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali alayhi salam. For surely if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can have a messenger by the name of Rasulullah, Allah can also have His hand manifest in Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. Simple theological matters closed in the school of Ahlul Bayt. But then you would find that these courageous mutakallimun people that came about in the Abbasid periods would go on for decades upon decades upon decades arguing, trying to come up with conclusions, and it came to no avail. These raging arguments would continue. People would lose lives over this. And again, it was always over basic matters. Does God have physical features or not? Is everything free will, or do we have predestination? All these things that the imams would answer to their students over the course of time, these people would have raging debates over. And it got to a point where now the students of Aristotle from the West would start migrating over to the Arab lands and challenging these mutakallimun, these theologians that had the courage to try and interpret Islam in their own way through their own sciences. And once they got in touch with the Aristotelian philosophers, and Aristotelian philosophers just like to question why, and is this a table or a chair? It could be both. I want to sit there and debate this for decades. So this kind of rhetoric came about, and then they started inserting that kind of human-like idea in the realm of the divine, in the realm of something that the human mind can barely comprehend. Things got complicated. And I'm sure as you're listening to me, things are continuously getting more complicated as I'm explaining this to you. And the point I'm trying to make here is that when a bunch of people think they know better than God and are arrogant enough to think they know better than God, what happens is that you get chaos. And the chaos would continue. And this is where the funny part would happen, is that at some point, these people that were trying to interpret Islam, and for the greater good, of course, because they were trying to, give us some fundamental beliefs to go on more so than just praying and fasting and just listening to things. They were trying to get us to think. And of course, they had the wrong tools to do it because they ignored the Imam of the time. What would happen is the population at large would just say, forget it. I don't want to learn from you anymore. You're confusing me. I don't get what you're saying. You're always debating. Now you're inserting Aristotelian philosophy in this. I don't get where you're going. The old grandma that's knitting in her, on her chair saying, I don't get what you're talking about. What kind of religion is this that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made it this complicated to understand Him? And by the way, it gets really complicated. I remember when I was taking some mysticism courses in my master's program. Oh my goodness, you would just read a paragraph at least 100 times and you still wouldn't understand what this guy was talking about. And it's not because your IQ is low, it's because probably he didn't understand what he was talking about because he was above his pay grade. There's no one that could just sit there confidently talking about the essence of God. In fact, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam says, if someone is arrogant enough to talk about the essence of God confidently, then he has actually left the religion of Islam and he's in his own religion. So at some point, people said, forget it. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Bring on Abu Hanifa, bring on Ahmad ibn Hanbal, bring the Muslim of Ahmad ibn Hanbal again. Let me open up these books. You know why? Because it was simple. It was, I just had to fast and pray and, make sure Maghrib is at this time. And if I'm going for Hajj and if it's hunting season, and if I want to fish and this, these basic things, I think I can understand that. But those theologians, what on earth are they talking about? They are confusing me. And this isn't my opinion. This is literally what happened in Islamic history. So we saw how it went from a chaotic voting system to sultanates and dynasties that came and went, to people who were trying to make an effort to reconcile Islamic beliefs, and all of them ultimately led to failure. Um, and so what would happen is the Muslims would actually enter the dark ages in Islam. I know whenever you talk to a lot of mainstream Muslims, they say Muslims were so brilliant. We have this scientist, we have that scientist, Ibn Sina and Al-Khawarizmi and all these people. But those are a handful of people, and that goes by. That's it. The reality is that majority of people didn't think like that. Majority of people were left ignorant. Majority of people had no idea what Islam was because of the poor authorities that would come about in Islam after the Prophet's death. And what I'm trying to get at here, brothers and sisters, is that um, sociologically, we went into a very dark place for a very long time. And what would happen is, the Mongolians would obviously come and destroy the Abbasid dynasty, and therefore Islamic authorities would leave us. At some point, because the Mongols actually took over like almost literally more than half the world was under the Mongol Empire. And from the vacuum of the Mongol empires, there came a group of Turks known as the Oghuz, and they would go into the land of what's known as Turkey today. They would go to that land, and they would start invading the Roman Empire, and then they would come up with the Ottoman empires, and a bunch of Turks suddenly became the authority in Islam. And again, this goes back to the chaotic teachings that we had early on after the Prophet's death. And then these Ottomans would go on for another 500 years until the 1920s during the World Wars, where they would be wiped off the map as well. Since then, the Sunni population at large has no Islamic authority per se, because they go by the caliphate system, which again, I keep saying did not make any sense in any kind of logical discussion. But they go back to the caliphate system, and now there is no caliphate. And if you saw, for example, the uprising of ISIS, when Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi went to Iraq and he stood on the podium and he made that whole speech, what he was trying to do, he was trying to establish the Islamic caliphate again through extremist measures, and we condemn him and his entire ideology once and for all, because we're the school of Ahlul Bayt. We don't need these kind of caliphates. The position that was gifted to Imam Ali alayhi salam never left. I have about 10 minutes left before I wrap up. But the point here is, brothers and sisters, the Muslims would now be sent into the Dark Ages for a very, very long time. And then something interesting happened. Something very interesting happened. A new group of theologians, people who were trying to make sense of the religion, would rise. And there are two very prominent ones. One of them was in the Shia world. And this one, and by the way, when I quote him, I know some people have taboos about him. Please, I don't agree with everything he says. I am just saying it for academic purposes so we understand the mindset of people. The first one that came about was an academic by the name of Dr. Ali Shariati, who's an Iranian academic, and he would go on to infiltrate the minds of the Muslims through a very strategic ideology known as liberation theology. And this liberation theology would be at a time where Muslims were conquered predominantly by the Western world. And what he would try and do is he would try and make sense of Islam through this fight against injustice methodology, and he would relate it. And I was actually curious to see why he was so big during his time. What made him so profound? What made him such a strong spiritual figure that many, many people became religious just listening to his very lectures? So a couple of them were on YouTube, and I put it on. And believe it or not, brothers and sisters, when I sit there and I listen to it, he's talking about basic stuff. He's talking about super basic, like stuff that you would see in Sunday school, about the imams today. We're lucky enough to have that opportunity. But back then, this stuff was foreign. For example, I remember in one of his lectures that I was trying to listen to, he said, uh, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the sixth Imam, says that anybody who does not recognize the Imam of their time or does not have an Imam is like a sheep without its shepherd. And the people in the audience would be like, wow, subhanallah, what a profound statement. But for us, this is kind of like preschool education in Islam. But that just goes to show that the level of the capacity of the Muslims at the time was such that someone coming and saying basic theological concepts like the Imam of your time would have such an impact. And then he would mix it with this ecstasy of fighting against injustice. Now, similarly, in the Sunni world, we had his opposite come about in the form of Sayyid Qutb. And Sayyid Qutb tried to do something similar and tried to unite the Sunni world in what he created was a vacuum, which would then later on lead to the Muslim Brotherhood, which is known as a fundamentalist organization today in Egypt. Nonetheless, these two figures came about and they sprout out this passion that was lacking in the Muslims because it had gone dormant for so long, highlighting one thing. There's one thing we can take away from this, that these two figures, while they may not have been on the right path, why they may not have been correct politically or theologically by any means, because they were making things up as they went along, they highlighted a fact that you do need to talk about belief at some point. Whether or not you're right or wrong, people will attach themselves to the principles of the belief more so than the actions. And that's why they became so influential. That's why they led to revolutions. And, you know, they were able to change the lives of many people because they inserted a certain level of passion into a otherwise darkened and ignorant Muslim populace. And again, these people would rise and fall. And what you'll notice at this point in my lecture, to conclude, is that the Muslims, since the death of the Holy Prophet, went through waves. There was a wave of wanting to make everything about actions, and then that would take a downward curve, and then it would be enlightenment through the Imams. For example, the Imams would teach about this stuff through universities. The Imams would teach about, Imam Baqir and Sadiq had established the first Islamic universities in Medina, that for over 100 years after their death, people in Masjid al-Nabi, the Prophet's mosque, would say, Qala Sadiq ala Muhammad, Qala Baqir ala Muhammad. They would quote the Imams, and so that would happen. And again, they would kind of be, it would fizzle out again during the Abbasid periods. And then a bunch of people by the name of the Mutakallimun would have the courage to try and talk about it, and then they would fail again. And every time it would fail, because there was no proper principle or there was a suppression of corrupt authority towards the Ahlul Bayt, people would resort to actions because the actions were easy. The actions made sense. The actions weren't confusing. The actions didn't really make me debate as much as I did when I was trying to make sense of everything else. And therefore, today, if you find yourself in a religion full of actions, brothers and sisters, it is for this reason. It is for the reason that I discussed in the last two nights, that we go through waves. We are constantly going through waves. And now, based on my research that I have deducted on my own, I have come to the conclusion that as of, and I'm going to ballpark it, as of the year 2011, and the reason why I say 2011 is because when you look at the adoption of smartphone technology, when you look at the adoption of the capacity for the internet to handle loads and loads of data, 2011 is that pivotal year where people started to have all this information at the palm of their hands. I can go through many different types of discussions and dialogue, and this was the rise of our generation's Google scholars, which I don't think is a bad thing. I think that people should try and understand as much as they can. And they should research Islam as much as they can to the best of their capacity. And what you'll notice is the further you delve deeper in the rabbit hole of Islam from an academic perspective, the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will humble you. The more you will be humbled as a Muslim when you go through all the literature out there, because you'll notice that a lot of people came at different times sprouting out nonsense. And then a lot of people, because of this nonsense, adopted it. And then the cycle would continue until we are here where we are today. I have about a couple more minutes left. Brothers and sisters, uh, we live in a time where we have access to a lot of information. We have access to so much of the works of the Ahlul Bayt. Yet in this time, brothers and sisters, we have never been more distracted. And interestingly, you know, the thing we practice the most, we become masters of. Understand that principle. And today, what I find, and I say this to myself before anybody else, is that the thing that we do the most, brothers and sisters, is distract ourselves. And therefore, we are masters of distraction. We are masters of distracting ourselves from the reality of life, from thinking about the purpose of life, from truly engaging in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result, this constant distraction has led to us going into a slight dark age. I don't want to say it is a dark age, but as much as we have information in the palm of our hands and we have access to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt, and we can now just copy and paste an Arabic hadith in a translator and get the English, virtually excuses are so little. There are so many English lecturers. During my time when I was growing up, I used to beg someone to come speak to me in English because everything was in the languages we had back home. And with all that said and done, never have we been distracting ourselves more. So one thing that I would really recommend before I conclude and hand the mic off to Sheikh Baghir Najad would be to discipline the mind. And yeah, it's like a doctor saying, go on a healthy diet. Well, what does that diet look like? In Ramadan, brothers and sisters, you have the perfect opportunity to discipline your mind. And it just takes once a week. Try this in Ramadan only. Once a week in Ramadan or any point in Ramadan, I know half of it is already passed, do something called a dopamine fast. You can Google it if you want. And a dopamine fast is basically, dopamine is a feel-good hormone we have in our brain. And right now we're surrounded by all these gizmos and gadgets and lights, and that releases dopamine. That makes us feel good. Have you ever noticed you like to look at fireworks in the dark of the night? You really enjoy that? Because when you see lights flashing at you, you get dopamine going on. And now you live in a digital world where from the palm of your hand to the television to your car display, everything's just popping out at you all the time. And your brain is being fatigued. It is becoming reliant on stimulus. And therefore, you need to give your dopamine receptors in your mind a break. So here's what I want everyone to try out when they have time. Dopamine can be released from having some chocolate or some yummy food. Dopamine can be released from all these lights and gizmos and gadgets we have. Dopamine can be just from talking to someone you really enjoy their company of. So what you want to do is you want to spend 6 hours. I recommend 6 hours to start with. Sit in a room with a pen, paper, shut your phone off, put it away, put it maybe on a Sunday so you don't have any meetings or anything special happening. Put the phone away, pen, paper, sit with yourself, no TV, no food, you can have a glass of water. You can't even do intense exercise because intense exercise even gets your serotonin levels up and the dopamine receptors get off. So pen, paper, water. If you're fasting, no water. Sit there for 6 hours and write down your thoughts. Write down things you're struggling with. Write down where your mind is going and try and think about why my mind is going there. If it's going through any kind of childhood traumas, if it's going to a moment where you have regret, write it down. And then towards the end of the 6 hours, sit there and reflect, where has my mind gone? Why has it gone there? And the more you make time to review what's happening inside you and clearing out all that excess waste that you have inside you, whether it's in your thoughts, or in your distractive behaviors that are also toxic, the more you'll realize you'll make room within you for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to enter and cleanse the soul. Because you're not distracted. The veils will slowly come off, the curtains will set aside, and Allah will make his way into your heart. As Allah says, He is closer to you than your jugular vein. So this is the practice I want to leave everyone tonight with. Rather than just focusing on how much dua and how many verses of the Quran you can read. In fact, Imam Sadiq recommends against this practice of us forcefully trying to finish the Quran in 30 days. Rather, the Imam wants us to sit there and reflect on the verses and take your time with it. Don't have it in a 30-day time frame where you just sift through the Quran as fast as you can so you can tell people you read it cover to cover. Sit there, take one verse a day, reflect on it, research it. Have a dopamine fast. Take all these distractions out. Have a moment with yourself. Have a moment with your thoughts. Clear your thoughts, and then allow Allah's light to enter your heart. With that being said, I won't take up any more of your precious time. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.